Καλησπέρα, καλώς ήρθατε. Θα μιλήσουμε στα αγγλικά, καθώς το εργαστήριο έγινε στα αγγλικά και έχουμε καλεσμένους από το εξωτερικό. I'm Daphne Dragona, and together with Panos Dragonas, we are curating the upcoming exhibition, Tomorrows, which is going to take place here at Diplareios. It is an exhibition of Onassis Cultural Centre, and it's opening on the 16th of May. Tomorrow's Stories, this event here that took place the last 3 days, is our first event, a pre-event of this exhibition. And I would like to briefly mention that the exhibition itself addresses the future, the urban future, through utopian and dystopian scenarios developed by artists, designers, and architects. I think that we aimed for, from the very beginning, when we started discussing the concept of the exhibition, was to go beyond generalized and idealized scenarios about the future. Because when we talk about the future nowadays, in a way we tend to refer to big contemporary metropolis, and to imagine cities that will become smarter, to a way of life that will be optimized, thanks to the platforms, the devices, the infrastructures, the systems of automation that will be in use. We wanted to bring into discussion the diverse dynamics, potentialities, and urgencies of different cities, and introduce stories, hypotheses, and speculations that take this into consideration. Athens is a city that can particularly challenge usual smart city scenarios. So having this in mind, we approached Liam Young, whose work critically engages with the future of the urban environment, and we asked him if he would be interested in creating a work especially about Athens. What is very interesting is that Liam has studied traditional architecture, but for quite some years now, he's operating in the fields of design, fiction, and future. He works on speculative urbanism and architecture, and he basically develops films, installations, and storytelling performances. So in a way, he tells stories about worlds that lie between the predicted and the unexpected, the real and the fictive. And he's exaggerating and projecting trends of the present into the future. Another thing that is very interesting is that for the worlds that Liam creates, he always collaborates with science fiction writers, technologists, artists, and illustrators who are discussing and building and writing together this hypothetical scenario. And I will now pass the mic to Panos, who will tell you a bit about the thing that we have here with us today and what happened these 3 days.
So the idea was to bring here in Athens a group of very interesting people to discuss about the future of the city. And it's a group of people that are from Athens or from abroad. And discuss about not exactly what the actual future might be, but speculate on the future and possibly exaggerate on some things which may be more characteristic of the present, but when you project them on the future, this is an opportunity for critical thought and reflection about what is happening around us already. So this group of our guests are James Bridle, who is sitting next to me, who is an artist and writer. James is actually a resident of Athens during the last few years. Leigh Alexander is a writer and a journalist whose work focuses on the intersection of technology and popular culture. Ioanna Bourazopoulou is a writer of novels, plays, and short stories that can be categorized as political fantasy and dystopian fiction. Bruce Sterling. Bruce is an author, journalist, editor, critic, and curator, but he's best known for his science fiction novels, which are very famous and awarded many times. Marina Gioti is a filmmaker and visual artist. Then, of course, is Liam. And together with us was also Kostas Charitos, an illustrator and concept artist who was capturing and illustrating live the presentation and discussions that we had throughout the 3 days. So what happened during these 3 days is that we had a series of long discussion and walking tours. We talked a lot about some very important and characteristic things about the city, about how Athens looks, what is the particular generic architecture of the city, the stepped line, the stepped skyline of the city, the generic architecture of the Polykatikia. We discussed also a lot about how the city has been produced, about the bottom-up development of urban development of the part exchange system, of Diplareios. We discussed about attempts of gentrification that have taken place in the past. Most of them failed once. And we also had long conversations about the people of Athens, the residents of Athens, family, relationships, the connections between family, Polykatikia, and the city. And we also had the opportunity to visit some characteristic places, to have the view of the city from above, to see some spaces where refugees live at the moment, people from Syria, some very recent events which are important for the life of the city. So this is the last day of this 3 days intensive storytelling workshop. What is going to happen today is that, first of all, Liam is going to make an introduction and explain his methodology and the way that he works. Afterwards, you are going to hear the output, what has been produced during this workshop. So everybody, every member of the think tank will read his own story. And the last part is that in the end, what we expect is not to hear your opinions, but we would like to invite you to contribute in this storytelling workshop. So we would be very interested in listening your thoughts about additional roles, characters, rules that could be important in a speculative future of Athens. So the last thing that I would like to say is that I would like to thank Onassis Cultural Centre, and in particular Christos Karas for his support, and the rest of the people from the Onassis Cultural Centre, Pasqua, Konstantina, Yorgos, who were very supportive during these 3 days. So I think that Liam, now it's your turn to tell us about the way that you work.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. And thanks so much for Panos and Daphne for putting this whole thing together. And of course, for this extraordinary row of collaborators who have given up their weekend to be part of this intense schedule, but also to give their thoughts and ideas and brain power to the imagination of a new world and an alternative near future Athens. And I'm entirely thrilled and humbled that these guys have joined us to contribute today. As was set up in a little bit in the intro, I'm originally trained as an architect, but essentially I've migrated from the design of buildings into a space that sits somewhere between documentary and fiction. And what we try and do is borrow from techniques of storytelling, of film, animation, and performance to collect and visualize stories of cities, both real and fictional, in order to engage audiences in the ways that technology is increasingly changing and shaping our urban worlds. So we have been exploring across the weekend this idea of designing an alternative world in order to understand our own world in new ways. So we travel to Athens here to listen to stories, to gather and collect trends and weak signals of possible futures, and then to play them out and to shape a world to come based on the inputs that we get from this particular place. And in a way, we're using these stories not to kind of predict a future, but it's a form of extrapolating or exaggerating from the present as a means to develop counter-narratives, where we exaggerate the world to reveal invisible connections and phenomena, and to prototype these possible futures, share them to an audience like this, as a means for us to start to develop relationships to them, not in any kind of form of prediction or modeling. We're not talking about the construction of a kind of future at all that we're putting in front of you today, asking you whether you believe in it or not, whether you think it's an aspirational future or not, but rather we're constructing what I would describe as a kind of visionary present, where we use these stories to really think about and to take a sideways look at the world. And sometimes it's through this practice of imagining otherwise that new relationships to the real are revealed, right? So I guess tonight we want to put these fictions out into the world in such a way that we can use them as departure points for a conversation about the city, about this city, about what this city could be and about what this city is. So we've been going across the weekend through a process called world building. And that's what we're going to try and do tonight, is to kind of unpack and construct for you this world that we've imagined. It's a world of a near-future Athens apartment block. And the last few days, we've been breathing life into a cast of characters and inhabitants that live in it and that shape in it. And what we're trying to do is to create this portrait of this fictional place through the lens of the lives of these residents, to somehow explore this future's quirks and inconsistencies, its hopes, dreams, fears, and anxieties, and in turn to also explore this city's and our own hopes, dreams, fears, and anxieties. So what I was interested in doing through this process was to play on this idea that the future is not something that just rushes over us like water, that it's something that we all play an active role in shaping and defining. And I guess the assumption is that the tools of fiction and storytelling are able to help us make these conditions legible, explicit, or visible, because it is this extraordinary shared language, right? Storytelling is the way that our culture shares and disseminates ideas. Ever since we can sit up, we're put in front of a TV, or we fall asleep being read a story. It really is the material through which, like Trojan horses, we can cite critical ideas about our present moment or ideas about what our future could be and put them out there so that we can start to develop emotional relationships to them, and in turn so that we can start to understand and imagine whether or not these are futures that we want to be inhabiting, whether they're futures we should be running away from, screaming. So this idea of designing immaterial architectures of stories that actually have resonant effects across real cities and spaces was the ambition for the project and for the weekend, and in turn for the exhibition tomorrow's that we're going to be opening in May. So when we started, I did a little intro on Friday where I showed a couple of references that I thought might be useful to go through again very quickly today, just to kind of get us in the headspace of this idea of world building, or this idea of a future, not as a predictive model, but a future as a critical tool. I started by presenting High Rise, that you may have seen recently adapted into Ben Wheatley's film, originally J.G. Ballard's novel, that was really a portrait of a world of class divisions and income disparity collapsed into a single autonomous tower block, where residents from the lower floors would embark on raiding parties, storming the decadent festivities of the upper floor elites. And the whole film, the whole novel, is set in this single tower. And just like our imaginary Athenian apartment block, the tower is a microcosm for the world that exists around it. It's a kind of magnifying glass for examining ourselves. Or George Perec's Life, a User's Manual, which is an imaginary Paris apartment block told through the narrative fragments of the lives contained within it. Or more contemporary, Chris Ware's Building Stories, which is a Chicago brownstone told through the lens of the mundane lives of its occupants, that take a bath, that daydream on the toilet, that wish they were someone else. Or one of my favorites, Richard Maguire's Here, which is a single room seen through its inhabitants across history, from the prehistoric beast to the 1970s teenager lounging on the shag pile rug, to this idea of a game of Twister that's played through time, even to the projection of a future where we see the world, the room, through the apparatus of a VR tour guide that takes groups back through the ages, peeling back the layers of wallpaper all the way to the beginning of this room's life. And it's a process of collaboration and world building that in my own practice we've done previously. In this case, a project New City, which is a series of animated matte paintings depicting skylines of the near future that are developed in collaboration in a similar way with authors, in this case Tim Morn, Pat Gadigan, and Jeff Noon. And together in intricate detail we imagined and depicted a speculative urbanism or an exaggerated present that was the projection of various environmental, political, and cultural conditions of a strange and discerning present. So we built these narratives and these stories and these skylines from photographs taken on expeditions around the world, documenting these emerging phenomena. And we meticulously stitched them together to reimagine the form of each future city skyline. And to accompany the animations, we asked the authors to write an original story set in the skyline to breathe life into the new city's characters and cultures and give narrative to its streets and spaces. And you would sit in front of these grand, super large-scale projections, reading the story and listening to the soundscape of the city. There were stories like the ones that we'll tell tonight, or like this one from New City called Samsung Town, which was written by Tim Morn, which is a city stitched together from photographs of the residential development seen on one of our expeditions through Korea, where Samsung, the technology brand, has evolved and branched out into property development. And we see a town where tech firms have become so big that they enter into all aspects of our lives. And these companies become new developers. And soon we will not be citizens of a place, but rather a brand. And in this narrative, we move to the Samsung city, we catch an elevator ride up to one of the apartments, and we eavesdrop in on a conversation that's playing out inside. And we hear a husband and wife arguing as he has brought home an LG TV into their Samsung housing block. What the hell will the neighbors say? His wife screams. Or Edgelands, which is a story developed with Jeff Noon, which is based on an expedition through all these kind of sites. This is the built infrastructure of the internet and the supercomputers that run much of the smart city systems that are now permeating all our cities. And Jeff imagined what would a city look like built entirely for these machines, the physical landscape of the cloud as an urban form, a city that's post-human, a city without us, where we follow a group of kids that have kind of broken in through the fences, that are scavenging through the data stacks of the city, a city that has left them behind. And they're digging for scraps of information, anything they can salvage and hope to sell on. And two of them we see fighting over a morsel of text, and they see the face of a one-time film star that's floating in the air like insect silk. On The City in the Sea that develops with Pat Gadigan, which is a literal floating city that's collaged together from all the placeless offshore outsourcing cities in India, China, and Africa that we've visited on similar kind of workshops and expeditions like this one. And this is a city built on the floating Pacific plastic garbage patch. And it's a global city, a kind of special economic zone that's drifting in international waters. And just like the real city it's modeled on, it sits beyond labor restrictions, visa regulations, and corporate tax laws. It's a kind of city of everywhere, of every place and no place. And Pat's constructed a story from one of the island's inhabitants that's sitting, waiting for monsoon season, where the sea can get pretty choppy, but the advantage of living in a plastic city is that you wibble and wobble, but just like its corporate founders, it's a condition that just never sinks. And finally, in our own short film, In the Robot Skies, we see a tower block that's depicted solely through the lens of the eyes of the drones that manage it and secure it. So in this context, the network of drones monitor the wayward youth of the tower block. And through their machine eyes, we watch as a young girl has hacked and decorated her own drone and uses it to pass notes to her boyfriend held under house arrest in the tower opposite. And like kids in an old-fashioned classroom secretly passing notes to each other, they scribble messages on their drone and send it back and forth between the towers. It's a story of two tower residents, but a portrait of a city in which drones form both agents of state surveillance, but also become co-opted as the aerial vehicles through which two teens might fall in love. And it's kind of a format across the weekend that we developed in one other project that I wanted to show you called Under Tomorrow's Sky. I show it because Bruce was also gracious enough to be part of that process. And we assembled a similar think tank like this one, including authors Warren Ellis, biologist Rachel Armstrong, and many more, and concept artist Daniel Dossiu that developed these images. And the conversations grew into this vision of a city, a book of short stories called Brave You Now, where each story was set in that city, and a large-scale movie miniature model that became a stage set for a whole series of narratives where across the course of an exhibition, people were invited back into this world to narrate a collection of characters and narratives and develop new films and illustrations. And we developed it into a series of one-to-one stage set installations from the city's various districts. And here we see the garment district designed by Bart Hess, where people dip themselves into 3D printing vats and and fashion becomes a manifestation of the glitches of their scan data. Or the biotech engineered forests designed by Cohen Van Balen that are engineered with plant prosthetics that design and create medicinal blueberries. Or the supercomputer with its gesture interface, which was designed as a real-time interactive experience by the media artist Marshmallow Laserfeast. Or the Lookout, that romantic spot on the top of a mountain where you sit and overlook the lights of the city, became a film developed by Factory 15 that imagined this city through the eyes of a group of kids playing hide and seek. So this material and this methodology essentially formed the framework for this weekend, where we began with this idea of constructing this near-future Athens apartment block, and in turn that grew into a block of the city where we started to play out these kind of processes of world building and storytelling. And it was important for us to start with the series of local stories. So our first day was actually listening to the stories of people from the city, Panos, Daphne, Marina, and Ioanna, that were able to join us and narrate their city in some form. And of course James, who's now living in this as an adopted city. And then across the last couple of days, we've been taking those stories and imagining alternative versions and constructing these new stories we call tomorrow's stories that constitute a window into this fictional apartment block. And we were joined by local concept artist and illustrator Kostas Charitos, who, like a courtroom illustrator, did a series of live sketches and visualizations of the discussion to put together a concept art set that will in turn shape the visual language of our new future Athens, and to help us move into the next phase where we'll be constructing an animated film of this future apartment block, narrated with the stories that we'll be talking to you about tonight. And that's really what we're going to do. That's the kind of departure point for this evening, is to tell you a series of stories from this imagined Athenian block. It's a block that, as I mentioned, stands for the microcosm of the world that exists around it. And hopefully tonight we'll get a glimpse into this world through these fragments, through these overheard conversations and reportage from a cast of characters, inhabitants, bots and animals that live there. So just for tonight, we'll kind of be eavesdropping in and listening through the thin walls of a possible future. And we should caveat all this in saying that the world is still very loose. It was an intense weekend, and we're not trying to present any kind of consensus, but rather the stories don't match up, but they have evolved to some extent from this world that we all imagine together and suggest in some ways what each of us thought was important about it. And as Panos suggested, we're not presenting this future for you to critique or to ask questions about. It's not a future that we're putting out in the room as a kind of prediction of what would happen, neither an aspiration of what should happen or could happen, but rather it's this kind of tool through which to examine who we are and where we are. And we ask that you are also going to be contributors to this world. So rather than asking questions at the end, we hope that you might contribute your own set of characters. And perhaps you see that there's someone that's missing that needs to live in the apartment block. Or perhaps one of our own characters has an incident that you imagine that we need to add to our stories. So hopefully it becomes a shared storytelling experience where we can tell you the stories that we've written across the weekend, and you may in turn tell us yours. So to begin, we thought it would be useful to sketch out just the framework of what this world is. And that's kind of the process that we went through. We began by collectively authoring what this world, what this block might look like, how it might operate, and then we split up and started to prototype narratives set within it. And where we got to was the idea that, and this section here will be illustrated by some of Kostas's sketches. We're here in a world where you no longer own a piece of an apartment itself, but you own rather a piece of the building. You own a percentage of the volume of the building, where any individual can legally own a certain square meterage, but this square meterage is not in a fixed location. So we might reformat the building or our apartment or our use of our square meterage allocation in the way that we reformat our Facebook page. So we're working on the premise of not a universal or minimum basic income, but rather a minimum basic floor space that's given to each of us that ensures some degree of comfort and security, but also becomes a position from which to bargain, negotiate, and reimagine what this building could be and how we each operate within it. It's kind of a bottom-up system of time-based spatial organization that in some ways descended from Greek laws of horizontal property rights, but has evolved to a form of volumetric property allocation. From a plane to a volume, the Athenian block becomes a kind of granular timeshare in a way. Or we imagine a new improvised architecture that's defined by a violent retrofitting of the city, remaking itself with extraordinary speed over and over and over again, where a walled room becomes just a temporary moment in the life of a construction material or in the life of a floor plate. We imagine flocks of bots that drift through the city, reorganizing it as they go, where they flock annoyingly around tourists, trying to hassle them for money, but for the most part, they leave the residents alone, calmly going about their business of remaking the city. They're like public space machines, like a post box, as Bruce says, not intruders in space, but just like pigeons, they become so ubiquitous that they almost become invisible. And they move through the city freely, but we can't drift in that same way. There's a kind of differential permissioning system that locks us out if we don't have access. It's like a laptop with administrator passwords or guest passwords that start to define where we can move in the city and what of the city is open to us and what is not. And a form of city planning becomes based around speed. So we imagine a new kind of city periphery dialectic based not on near or far, but rather on fast or slow, on permanence or impermanence. And Li-Fi and light becomes the defining technology that shapes volumes of space. And Athens, we've talked about, is not a dystopia. It can't ever be a dystopia because it has sunshine. So in this case, solar cells proliferate on the rooftops, and the system operates not on a platform anymore. They've long since died, but actually on a system of locally based Li-Fi networks. And the volume that you own is based on how far you can throw your light. Each person has their own color hue, and civil software engineers restrict software to particular building systems, and it's a Li-Fi system that stays within the confines of the block, based purely on line of sight. And natural weather systems and Li-Fi systems start to interact. So this block becomes this kind of intensified, stratified system where unlike moments are collapsed on top of each other. It's a block that's not a utopia or a dystopia, but through its rapid timeshare protocols becomes something that exists on both ends of that spectrum and everywhere in between, where a productive dystopia sits below an aspirational utopian urban farm, or an ambiguous hack space occupies a shop front from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. So that's where we got to, and what we're going to do is kind of narrate for you a series of stories that form moments within it that hopefully sketch out a larger version of what this world is and start to fill in the cracks and the gaps and illuminate some parts of it, or maybe disguise and confuse others. And as we said, at the end of that session, we hope that you can riff off the same stories in the way that we've been doing across the weekend and start to add any characters that you think must live here. And with that, I think we're going to start the stories. We're going to go, essentially we're going to bounce around. We've each written some short, some long, some structured, some looser. And we're kind of going to do a sort of game of ping pong as we move back and forth as people start to read their stories. We're going to start with Bruce.
Great. Thank you for coming. It's been a lot of fun to work on this fiction in Athens. It's like a mix of architecture, little theater, and performance art. So, in downtown Athens is an old apartment building designed by Dimitris Vatouris in 1957. That is the setting of our city drama. It's a block on Patrician Street, which isn't called Patrician Street anymore. And our heroes are called Aristotle and Plato, although those aren't their real names anymore either, because this is the future. Aristotle is an older man who's known Athens all his life. That's why he has such a good apartment and a prized location. And Plato is a younger cousin of his who's a medical student. He needed the space in Athens for his studies. Aristotle is a bald guy with a beard, while Plato is a younger, muscular man who likes nice suits and nightlife adventures. They're two Greek men of the world who have become roommates. They're civilized Europeans, so what really interests them is the quality of a life well lived. What are the possibilities of modern life in this densely packed mid-21st century city where all the windows glow with intelligent light? In their spare hours, Aristotle and Plato like to wander the streets of Athens, contemplating the rich spectrum of contemporary urbanism. These wise and observant roommates see many things that normal people never notice, such as the hundreds of flying drones and the many kinds of delivery robots. Most people simply ignore these machines because they're as common in Athens as manhole covers or pigeons or fire plugs. But a robot, philosophically speaking, is a computer that can pick up and move objects from one volume of space to another volume of space with no human intervention, cheap and fast. A good city has a lot of public space. A good modern city has a lot of robots, which are public space movers. Aristotle and Plato live in a building of the 1950s that is 85 years old, but it feels dynamic because it's mobile, it's granular, it's reconfigurable. It is a democratic scramble of atoms and bits. In the year 2042, Athens is enjoying an economic boom because of changes in real estate policy. Aristotle doesn't own real estate. He owns unreal estate. Instead of square meters of walls and floors, he owns access rights to some cubic meters in Pattisian Street. He owns volumes of space. He owns the right to space as a service. It's like he owns the Platonic ideal of an apartment rather than an apartment itself. All these apartment buildings in Athens have slightly different digital services inside, in the same way that they have different windows or different stairwells or different doors. It's the new model of urban computation that arose directly from the Athens condominium laws of the 1950s and 60s. But instead of individuals using personal computers to connect to the internet, these are entire Greek families inside co-owned apartment buildings connected to smart building services. There is no central planning, none at all. Instead, there are thousands and thousands of rooms and separate tower blocks managed by civil engineers, or rather, civil software engineers. And since this is at Athens, nobody ever agrees about anything. Every building, even every room, is free to become smart in some slightly different way. So even though the tenants own the rights to the space in the building, they never own any particular floor of the building. In January, Aristotle lived up on the 4th floor, and in July, he lived in the basement. And in August, his roommate arrived, and they both left and sublet their apartment to some rich German tourists. And that was convenient because the robots moved all their possessions for free. All the furniture and appliances in the building are designed to be picked to pieces by robots and easily moved and reassembled. However, all good things must come to an end, so the day arrived when Plato graduated from school. He's no longer a medical student. He's become an emergency medical technician. He's going to leave Athens to work in the climate change disaster zones. So the two roommates will have to part. It is a crisis in their lives, really, and it sounds something like this. Birds are chirping and a pleasant evening in April. The two roommates have been out for a farewell dinner, sentimentally enjoying some beer. But when they wander back to their home space on Pattisian Street, the neighbors have abandoned the building. They're standing around in the blackened street with candles and flashlights, murmuring to one another. Good heavens, says Aristotle. What has happened here? It's a technical failure, says the rich man from the penthouse floor. It happened just an hour ago. All our intelligent lights went out. We have no data, no electrical power, no robot services. We have nothing. How is that possible, says Aristotle? We have our own power supply here. Our building has a firewall from the internet. It's all been taken care of. I'm as amazed as you are, says the rich man in his silk pajamas. It must be the city's fault. There's a blackout all the way to the Parliament building. I blame the administration. It's cloud software, says Aristotle. It's the cloud cuckoo land. Every time they upgrade the urban services, something always screws up. All the neighbors look from one to another. They're like a cross-section of the population of Athens. Little children, grandmothers, a few stupid tourists, the old people, the young, the thin, the fat, all sharing one smart architectural space. Oh yes, they wisely tell one another as they stand on the sidewalk. Even if there's 99% uptime, a crash is sure to happen sooner or later. Nothing is perfect. Let's be reasonable here. It's the alpha rollout. At least it's not raining on us. Let's have some drones bring us some pizzas. But Mom, I want souvlaki. No, I want the spinach pie. Plato is a curious man. He's good looking. He's charismatic. He has a doctor's bedside manner. You never get to meet the neighbors, he says, except in little emergencies like this. We should take advantage. He turns to a pretty woman in a sequin dress. So beautiful. I never got to talk to you, and tomorrow I'll be leaving Athens. I'm sorry to see you go, says the girl in the party dress. Maybe this is fate. You're a cafe singer, am I right? Oh yes, I'm Cassandra. I rent a performance space every Tuesday and Thursday where I sing the tragic Greek Rembetika classics. I sing the saddest music in the world, Rembetika music. It's full of poverty and suffering and crisis and bitter disappointments. So, how is your tourist business? Says Plato. The tourists think life here is great, but us musicians, we can never get a break, no matter what. I could starve to death singing my classic folk songs. I make all my money renting out my big apartment, and there I do pretty well. Yes, I can see that, says Plato, eyeing her. I'm an emergency medical technician, and now that I have my degree, I'll be a busy guy because broken hearts are everywhere. Wait a moment, says Aristotle. I forgot that I ordered your moving services for tonight. The robots are supposed to be packing up all your possessions while we had dinner. Is it really that quick and simple, says Plato. That's the benefit of living in such a smart building. We have a few beers, we play a round of billiards, we come home, everything's neatly packed. I paid for the full package. The robots packed everything you own down to your last toothbrush. They also repainted my ceilings and remodeled the kitchen while we were gone. How can robots possibly do that during a power failure? We better go check on the situation. The stairs are dark and spooky when the smart light has blacked out. Where are our video projections? Where is our augmented reality? It's so quiet and dark. It's like a tomb, our concrete building. It's stone dead. It feels like the 20th century in here. Muffled banging. My God, I think someone is stuck in our elevator. Do you smell something burning? My door, it doesn't recognize my face. The door is locked tight. It's as stupid as a door made of wood. Where is your manual override? What did they call those things? Door keys. Don't you have a key? I never use keys. No one used keys. The lock is rusted shut. My God, look, we're powerless. Life has turned stupid. Smart cities are moronic. It's the end of the world. This is a true emergency, my boy. Wait a minute. That's right. I have a degree in things like this. This is an emergency situation where a guy like me is supposed to shine. Plato takes a credit card from his wallet, deftly pries open the door. Little knowledge is a dangerous thing, Plato. You could rob this whole building with that one simple trick. Oh, come on, nobody robs apartments in Athens. The smart light sees everything that moves. Besides, these are our neighbors. I can't hack the neighbors. That's completely uncivilized. The two men enter the dark, still apartment. It seems older than the Parthenon. All the robots are frozen like marble statues that have gazed at Medusa. Every item in the apartment is scattered or half dismantled. It's a grotesque disorder of paralysis and collapse. Somewhere water is dripping. They were supposed to fix all this in 30 minutes. Our apartment has crashed, just like a crashed computer. Philosophically speaking, our apartment is a crashed computer now. Our intelligent space, it's unconscious. Good God, what ugly machines these moving robots are. They look like giant can openers. When they're dead, they look 10 times worse. These robots are supposed to work in the dark. No one ever sees them working. I've never seen a mess like this. Even the poorest people in Athens have free robot maid service. This is like something medieval. Oh, come now, it's not that bad. They've simply dismantled the furniture and moved half the kitchen wall. When the robots wake again, they can reassemble everything for us. But I'll take plenty of pictures in case there are damage claims. It does look terrible, doesn't it? My poor wife, God rest her soul. She always told me I would end up like this without her. You promised you'd make a farewell dinner for us. Well, yes, I love to cook, but I don't know, Plato, that pile of wreckage there, it used to be our stove, our whole kitchen. It's like a demolished car. He gently kicks a frozen robot. You ugly rascal. Who designed you? This is my suitcase. Look, they went mad. The robots covered it with paint. If they've ruined my best suit, I'll sue. Cassandra appears. She looks in curiously with a candle in her hand. What on earth has happened in here? Feel free to come in here, madam. Our space is your space. The system crashed while the robots were rebooting our apartment. What a sight to see, eh? Wow, this looks just like my grandmother's anarchist squat used to look. Modern life without intelligence is like a vision of hell. All the lights come on suddenly. Oh well, the light has returned. Life begins anew. Everything will reboot. Plato picks up some heavy debris in order to impress the singer. Then Aristotle says, look, Plato, you can fix people now. That doesn't mean you can fix Greek robots. Let's all go out for an ouzo. The machines will repair this mess themselves if we give them a chance. If it's still screwed up by midnight, then we'll sue. And Cassandra says, would you like to occupy my apartment? Because my robots installed a new kitchen for me just last week. Aristotle says, you, a cafe singer, you have a brand new kitchen. How does that working for you? I don't know. I got the kitchen for my tourist guests. As a singer, I can't cook. Well, says Aristotle, let's take everything from the refrigerator before it spoils, and I'll teach you a few tricks in the kitchen. These new kitchens, they're sustainable and a bit much to handle. They look at the lamb and the severed pig's head. Aristotle says, let's invite all the neighbors in. We'll make a blackout party. We'll join together and we'll cook all the food in the building at once. Besides, I need to find a new roommate now anyway, because to live alone, a man must be like a god or very like a wild beast. And Cassandra says, that is so true. Men are exactly like that. Nowadays, a man can stay in the same place while a woman's bedroom can move anywhere. And Aristotle says, you two should get comfortable, and I'll go downstairs and tell all the neighbors about our good luck. And the girl says to Plato, your roommate certainly is a nice old man. And Plato says, yes, he's a true philosopher.
Okay, excuse me, I'm going to stand to do mine. I wrote 2 very short little sketches set in some other tiny version of this world, and this is the first one. It's about someone being shown into their new apartment. The agent opened the heavy door and led Yannis into the middle of a dark, cavernous space. The windows, mostly blocked by the walls of the next building, let in just enough light to see an old wooden desk and chair on one side of the room, a sagging green couch against one wall. This place was used as a doctor's office some time ago, but don't worry about that, the agent said. Let's see what we can do with it. She placed a small silver box on the floor, a milled aluminium cube with bulbous glass lenses on each side. Stepping back, she tapped a few icons on her phone. A thin green laser beam flickered across the walls and ceiling, probed the dust-filled corners, was followed by a loud beep as the projector mapped the interior of the room. Seconds later, the whole place turned flat white, as the perfectly mapped shadows were filled with 1,000-lumen bright bulb glare. The desk seemed to float in space without any background. The green couch, doused with opposing frequencies, simply disappeared. "Okay, what were you thinking?" asked the agent, as a Google image search box appeared beside the door. "We've got Bauhaus, Vitra, Herman Miller, Johnny Ive, a series of bentwood, lacquered, steel-tubed, and increasingly insectoid pieces of furniture scrolled down the wall. Here, everyone likes this," she said. Some Mark Newsom, a monstrous, bulbous, riveted aluminium daybed appeared in one corner, the metal perfectly specular, smooth and brightly polished. No, said Yanis, not that, more flat. "Ah, okay. We have some lovely 21st century textures as well. Some early Floyd, some classic Tilco. Or for something really special, I can offer one of our IKEA packs. Very eclectic, very tasteful, 100% uncustomized." The daybed winked out of existence, to be replaced by a set of side tables in primary colors and a rectangular bookcase. "Ooh, lax, and a billy," exclaimed Yanis. "Ah, I can see that Sir is a connoisseur." The agent tapped some more icons, and a series of blonde wood and laminate objects started to appear around the space. A low, Japanese-style bed overlaid the couch, and Yanis sank down onto it. His eyes gleamed. "This is perfect," he said, gazing at the crisp storage units and perfectly rendered stools. "Wonderful," said the agent. "I'll leave the rest up to you. Happy to have been of service." A few hours later, as Yanis dumped the last of his belongings onto the floor, where they were instantly obscured by pixel-perfect renditions of seagrass baskets, the box on the floor beeped loudly, and all the furniture disappeared. "We hope you're enjoying the service," said a tinny voice emanating from the projector. "As part of your freemium subscription to your apartment, I'm happy to offer you a voucher for related services." One entire wall was replaced with the rotating logo of efood.gr, as a series of different dishes appeared in rows across the floor. "Would you like some food? Just say souvlaki, and a takeaway drone can be at your window in 5 minutes." Yanis looked down at the dusty floor, back at the grim green couch. "Souvlaki, I guess," he said. And instantly, he was back in his room again. Thank you.
This is going to be useful. So I wrote a series of very short little fragments just for color and just to break up the rhythm a bit. This first one is an interview fragment with a poetic space hacker who lives in the block by their own rules, like a hobo kind of riding the train lines. He waxes lyrical and plays the city like an instrument. "We grab sleep in hour chunks," he says, "between a yoga class and a baby's feeding, between the opening of the club and the end of a lecture, after the John has left, but before the drones arrive to change the sheets. The tent pops up in seconds, and I'm usually out to it once my head hits the pillow. We live in the interstitial sights of leftover time. We surf between the waves, we ride the schedule, we are the invisibles, and we like it just fine." Next story is from Ioanna.
Hello. As Liam and Bruce and James explained, in this imaginary world, house property is fluid. It's movable. So I concentrate on one enterprise, the baby parking. So the baby parking in the future will not be established in a specific space. It will move around the block using square footage of several flats. So square footage is actually a currency. You pay in square footage. In other words, you give away the use of a specific amount of square meters in your flat for a specific amount of hours a week, so that the baby parking will operate there in your apartment. And in return, you earn the right to use it. This is both convenient and economic, because the baby parking is at your doorstep, always in the block, and it is economic because it has no operational expenses apart from the salaries for the governances, since it always operates inside the house. In this dialogue I wrote, a young couple wants to enter the baby parking plan of the block. So they go to the baby parking manager. Wife: "Hi, we have a daughter. She's only 11 months old. We would like to enter your baby parking plan. It's a 40 square footage participation in order to enter, right?" The manager: 45, actually. We believe in child mobility. Wife: "Okay, we can offer a 30 square meter living room and a 12 square meter nursery connected with a 5 square meter corridor." Manager: "Use of kitchen and bathroom?" Wife: "Certainly, with all the necessary amenities for baby care." Manager: "All right. We have an opening for Tuesday mornings from 8 till 4 and Saturday nights from 7 in the evening until 3 p.m. Wife: "It's all right for Tuesday, but give up our flat every Saturday night?" Manager: "Saturday night is not negotiable. All couples want to go out on Saturday night and leave the babies. It's the only opening we have." Husband to the wife: "Maybe we can go to my sister's on Saturday night. She has rented the use of the 6th floor flat library for her dissertation, so she can let us use the house." Wife: "But your sister gets her degree in 4 months. What will we do after that? Where will we be staying every Saturday night? Nina is only 11 months old. We can't move around every Saturday night." Husband: "We won't have to. She won't have to. She will be sleeping in her nursery, in her own bed, in her own room, surrounded by children and guarded by a governess, while we will be out visiting friends. It's a perfect arrangement." To the manager: "We're in."
Thanks. Leigh, you're up next.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. So I did 2 short vignettes that focus on how this world where real estate is a primary resource affects the development of the traditional family structure. In this first story, the group had imagined that if you were part of a large family, or if you had a number of alliances in your block or in your building, you would be able to control more of the space or advocate for a better opportunity for yourself. So this is the story of one such great family and the challenges they have maintaining their traditional sense of power in this new world. Sooner or later, everyone has to move. Even Mama Tula, who with great determination, bitter rancor, and much negotiation, has at last secured the top floor of the block. It has taken the full leverage of her vast dynasty with all its squabbles and forced allegiances. In her great house, you can still see the violent seams where, with sledgehammers and flourishes of victory, concrete walls have at last been knocked down. The furnishings are notable. A pale Persian rug stamped down to a ghost of itself, an embroidered sofa that's become a riot of layered stitchwork, perhaps decades of repairs, some more skillful than others. A garish drilling sound rumbles up from below. A large woman in a green dress and a brown apron leaps to coddle a turn-of-the-century cabinet of Corian-clad pine wood with an open front. She shields it with her whole body, while inside the ill-fitting furnishing, ancient glassware and cut crystal trembles with the noise. To the glassware, the woman mutters, "Shh, shh." When the tremor subsides, she shoulders her way out onto the balcony, throwing aside the tangle of greens and loose cables as if they were curtains, as if she figured in the first act of some dramatic work. In a sense, she does. Mama Tula, the queen of the very top floor. "Stop that racket, you damn robots," she shouts fruitlessly to the neighbor downstairs. But there are no human ears to hear her. This month, the scourge of her existence is an engine repair shop. The gleaming arms with candy-colored fiberglass elbows and shoulders, pecking and pounding at unknowable things, things far beyond the mama's ken. Last month, it had been the tourists who cooked intransible smells at an hour much too early for a civilized dinner. The sun was still up, for goodness sake. Behind her, something falls to the floor with a dull thud. None of the telltale glittering noise of a shatter, thank goodness, but the mama still whirls. Another scourge, some nephew, some grandchild, sometimes she couldn't keep track of them all, is playing with the bulbous stopper of some fine decanter, entirely uninvited. "Stop it," she hisses, snatching the thing away. "If you're going to destroy the apartment, then there was no point in you having been born." The baby stares, uncomprehending. "Come on, Mama," says a lanky teen girl on the ottoman, languidly tracing her finger across some cold black thing, an unfamiliar language of devices. The devices. They're all part of some constellation that operates in a magical fashion, even more mysterious to Mama than the rules that govern the block. The crystal decanter is an object she understands. There is a logic Mama follows into the guest room to find which one is missing its stopper. There, slotted back in with a clink, and the imaginary sound of laughter. All the parties she'll have one day when this nonsense is over. People moving around, strangers coming in and out of the block, having to live with all of her unbearable relations just to maintain the order of the home. "Don't chide me, girl," the mama says to the teen, in her own good time. "I tell you all, if you don't mind me, you'll end up in one of those old ice-cold server rooms in a block on the other side of town." "No," the teen says suddenly, real fear dawning in her face. "Or a single room full of somebody else's fiberglass furniture." "Mama!" "What do we always say? This, and only this, is our building." The ruthless stutter of machinery below starts again. From somewhere else, another person's baby begins to cry. Mama can always tell the sound of other tenants' babies. Their calls are raw and scratched in discontent, the voices of babies with bad apartments. Immediately, she holds the glass cabinet again, her body pressed into it in a sort of embrace so that nothing will fall down. "Where is your brother?" she shouts into the cabinet. "This is meant to be his duty." "I don't have a brother, Mama," the girl says wearily. "I'm Anna." Yes, she says. "And what do you contribute?" "My sense of duty and family and my allegiance to the block," the teen replies dutifully in the manner of well-trod words. "Good," Mama says. The noise stops. A dog barks outside. Anna stirs hopefully but makes no move to vacate. "If you get up," goes the saying, "someone will soon sit in your place." The baby has now found some kind of ragged metal object on the floor. Mama is still embracing the crystal as if it could throw itself from the shelf, all on its own, just to spite her. She would not allow that. She will not allow it. Someone chimes at the door's outside keypad. "Don't answer," she shouts in a panic. A chorus of voices calls back dutifully from the bedroom, from the dining room, from everywhere. "We won't." Another baby crying. This time, it is one of theirs.
Thanks, Leigh. This one is a fragment from the perspective of a cat who's no longer owned, but is instead a shared resource of the block for comfort and cuddles. The cat was scraping at the door. The last time we met was when my apartment was here a week ago, and we shared a moment. I gave it some salted fish. I'm pleased it remembers me. The block cats are usually pretty fickle, and they pick their favorites, the warmest bed, the longest massage. It's a life of passing fancies and momentary flirtations, cuddling up to whoever's in the block that night. They belong to all of us and none of us. And Ioanna, you're doing your next piece.
Okay. In my generation, wild teenagers used to secretly use the parents' car, so snitch the car keys. I guess nowadays, wild teenagers probably snitch the parents' credit cards. In the future, wild teenagers will secretly snitch rooms and square footages. So this is a teenager who really needs money to upgrade his computer. Thus, he turns to the janitor for digital currency, because the janitor has all types of legal and illegal works and stuff. Teen. I'm running slow, man. I really need this. Janitor. I told you, Dimitri. I've already put your room on the market. No demand for teenage bedrooms. Sorry. Teen. Come on, man. I'm desperate. Well, says the janitor, you have a nice, huge place up there. You know, the Flying Casino is operating in our block this week. Great demand for honeymoon suites. Something like your mom and dad's luxury bedroom. Teen, come on, man, my folks are gonna kill me. Janitor, as a matter of fact, they joined the hothouse plan on the 3rd floor. They do gardening in the weekends. It's only for a couple of hours. If you drop me the key, I'll bring the sheets and take care of the laundry. It's a deal, man.
Okay. In my story, I'm actually, in the building there is a superintendent basically that is the building manager, and he takes care of everything, so he'll be very present in my story. And it's a story about a Greek typical family, a nuclear family, which I preserved because I don't think there's going to be that much change in the future in several institutions. Actually, it's how the building deals with when somebody dies. So. Flat of a family of civil servants, Sofia and Kostas Papatheodorou with their 16-year-old son Stamos and their 85-year-old grandmother Katerina, who had a stroke 8 years ago and has been bedridden ever since. 55-year-old Sofia, who's been taking care of her mother all these years, rushes into the living room with tears in her eyes. Her husband Christos is watching a TV show. Stamos is on his tablet playing an online game with the other kids on the polyblock. It features a parkour competition which virtually happens on the rooftops of the block. They developed it themselves. Sofia, Christos, she's not breathing. Stamo, your grandma died, my mother. I lost my mother. Sorry about my acting abilities are not that good. They go to next door to grandma's 5-square-meter apartment, a tiny space that only a bed and a bedside table fits. We should call the doctor and the superintendent. The son looks up from the screen, looks utterly unaffected by the sad news. I'm entitled to more cubic meters now. Grandma promised I keep her space when she's gone. I just can't fit in my room anymore. It's crammed. I need more space. And what about your cousin, Katerina? She might be entitled too. We have to check this with the building superintendent. He has her will. Mom, we took care of her. Katerina never showed up to see her when she was ill. Stamo, this is for later. Can't you wait till after the funeral? She just shut her eyes. But even if we're entitled to the space, you're not 18 yet. You will get it in 2 years. I think we should make some space for our laundry to stick the washing machine in and store the carpets for the summer. We can't afford giving them to storage anymore. The polyblock GP doctor arrives with the superintendent. The doctor confirms her death. Superintendent, my deepest condolences to you and your family. We should be moving really fast to clear the space and furniture for reuse. Sophia, can you please wait till the priest comes? Christo, can you please message the priest to come and give her his blessing? And my brother, call Nikos immediately. The block priest arrives from his apartment on the first floor. May she rest in peace. The memorial service can be held the next day at 10, tomorrow at 10, at the block's chapel. Is that okay with the rest of the family? Will they be able to be present? It's just us and my brother Nikos' family. They live on the 4th floor. Her brother Nikos with his wife and daughter Katerina arrived too, weeping. Superintendent, the body will be taken care of by my assistant. Recomposition usually takes 6 weeks to be completed. The resulting soil will be replanted in the block garden on the ground floor, if you agree. Can you please come down to my office to read the deceased will and sort out the rest of the details? The superintendent orders his assistants to remove the body and send it to the building's terrace on the 7th floor to the recomposition dome. Since 2 years ago, in 2040, the Greek government finally reached an accord with the Church of Greece towards long-standing issues regarding burial, and recomposition became adopted. Recomposition is a human composting method that was invented around 2015 that turns the human body into soil, which can then be deposed in gardens. Any body can be recomposed at a special area on a building's terrace. All family members are gathered at the superintendent's office ground floor in order to read Grandma's will. In the meantime, he updates the government's population register website about the death and downloads grandmother's will from the tax office website. Notaries do not exist anymore. So some sort of bureaucracy has been erased from the Greek system. According to Grandma's will, both cousins Stamos and Katerina inherit the space. The families enter a row of how they're going to separate the 5-square-meter property. At the same time, on the 3rd floor, where the deceased woman is not there anymore, the janitor's assistant is removing Grandma's bed and bedside table and moving them to the 6th floor because a tourist couple from Norway just arrived and they need an extra bed for the 12-year-old daughter.
Thanks, Marina. This is a spatial troll, some kind of nuisance in the system that just fucks with people in the block just because they can. Rich cunts, he says, as he pulls a greasy marker from his bag and shakes it rigorously, the ball bearing inside rattling against the outside of its case. They think sharing their space makes them an easy few bucks on the side. While they are out each day, I like to draw big, fat, hairy cock and balls on the wall of their sitting room. They know it's me, shitting in their toilet and forgetting to flush. It only takes a moment for them to call the bots and clean me away, but it's enough to know that they just see it when they come home. Ioanna.
Marina gave us an aspect of the economics of death. Sorry. Marina gave us a glimpse of the economics of death in the future. I will give you a quick glimpse of another aspect of the economics of death, the funeral arrangements. A man's dog has just died, Magdalena, and he looks for a place to cremate her and a way to say a civilized goodbye. So funeral homes operate, of course, including inside flats, and accommodate the whole block. The mourner, that's the man, right. Do you accept dogs? I live down the street, but pets are not accepted in our funeral home. Administrator, no problem. We have special burial urns. Okay, pronounce it rightly.
Urns.
That's it. Okay, for the ashes. You just want to use the parlor, or you want the ceremony as well? Man, what types of ceremony do you offer? Administrator, religious or artistic? We usually suggest artistic for pets. Mourner, she was my best friend, sir. My only friend. Administrator, well, you can book a chorus, or a whole performance, or even a Christian ceremony. Mourner, I want all three, sir. She was my best friend. Administrator, all right. You can come at 7, and you'll have the parlor for 1 hour. How many guests should we expect? Any need for refreshments? Mourner, she was my only friend, sir. I will come alone. Can I just bring the 2 dogs she used to play with? Administrator, sure, I'll have dog biscuits.
Thanks, Leigh.
This one is a love story. Around 5 in the evening, when the light grew long and red and threw misshapen shadows around the block, Anna came down to the vacant space on the 2nd floor and sat at the window, listening to the hum of distant cables, the occasional buzz of a passing drone bringing dinnertime delivery. That day, it was right on time. The rigid airplane of folded paper looping languidly from somewhere outside, sailing through the window, making a smooth landing on the hard floor. She never wanted to ask Nick how many he threw, how many it took to aim one across the concrete canyon between their 2 blocks and into the open window. She preferred to imagine it, fingers tracing the subtle variations in folds or the quality of the salvaged material each time. This time the wings upturned, that time a weight to the nose. What if he sat in a room full of reams, experimental planes? What if he spent hours, every crisp fold a line he was trying to draw straight towards her heart? The planes that crashed were always swallowed up by the darkness of the street below, uncounted. There was never anything on the paper, of course. That was never the point. The point was that she would run to the great big window, its edges tattered by remnants of repairs, and from somewhere on the 8th floor next door, he would see that she was impressed. That was the main thing, really. He was the kind of guy who needed that. In other words, typical. After the ritual of the window, Anna took her black device out promptly. On its face, she saw a fine spider web of blue and white lines, each luminous node representing a block, and she drew her own sharp line with the tip of her finger between her block and his. And with purposeful movements, she picked her way through the directory to block 11, floor 8, room 2B. 11, 8, 2B, a harmonious array of numbers. But then under them was Nick's name. "You were quick today," she replied in text, sketching her fingers over the glass, adding an impressed face with a small tap. He was always slow on his device, but that wasn't so relevant to Anna. There were more important things than speed, like security and personal hygiene, and like living on the 8th floor. "Thanks, babe," Nick replied with a wink face. Anna hated the wink faces, but she would learn to live with them. If she could live in 1182B, then she would learn to live with all his quirks. No one in her family had planned on seeing her marry a civil engineer, least of course Anna herself. But then she found out he had a really good room, and now she would get married and move to block 11 if it was the last thing she ever did. Nick didn't know yet about the marriage, of course. It had only been 2 weeks of dating. Okay, 2 dates in 2 weeks. And because his schedule was so busy, Anna had conceived of the paper airplane game as a way of hot-wiring the romance. To him, it would be old-fashioned, romantic, a chance to show off, to be suffused with feelings in response to her admiration. For Anna, it was a ritual, The confirmation of a real-life flight path from her third-floor post-industrial space to 1182B. Every paper bird that sailed into this space had come from that coveted apartment. Sometimes when she unfolded the paper, she sniffed it, imagining that it held the scent of new carpet and leather, the smell of upward mobility. She would rub it all over her throat like those historical magazine perfume samples, if she could. Because Nick was predictable and not at all creative, Anna knew in her soul that one day the marriage proposal or the letting agreement ratified by all the assemblies of Block 11, or maybe even both, would sail through this window on folded wings. Even he had to know that the letting agreement would be more romantic without her having to say it. She hoped it happened before someone came to take this vacant room and forced her to come up with some new romantic notion. "How are you?" Nick texted. Wink face. "I'm suffering because I can't see you," Anna jabbed the screen romantically with her fingertip. "Next fry," he replied. "Come to window tomorrow?" "Of course, my heart," she replied. Unbidden, the system auto-corrected heart to house, so Anna cursed softly. "Haha," he replied, as he usually did when she made any kind of complex reference. Wink face.
And James, bring us home. Yeah, thanks.
All right, yeah. So the last one, I believe, of all of our stories, what some folks might do given full access to being able to occupy any smallest space of the building at any one time, in the form possibly of some kind of game. 3A to 5B, knight's move. Queen to 3G. A spatial arrangement of pieces, each piece a volume of occupied space. Now, if I can get Petros to move up a floor, I can take the fifth and block off that access. He won't see it coming because he's arrogant. He used the same move on me back in December, but he doesn't think I know how he did it. Now count it. 3 cubic meters of the equipment room on 4, another 8 in the bathroom next door, and the full height of 17. That makes 28, which means I'm going to have to ditch the kitchen on 3, and probably the spare bedroom. The Ioannidis won't miss it. Their kid's just started his PhD. They don't need the space. The new guy in 17, where's he from? Texas. I'm going to have to call him. Hi, hello. I need you to move. I know, you just got here. But here's the thing. It works like this. Petros and I started playing in, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, if you can call it that. We used to work together at the ministry. We played Tavoli in the afternoons. Tavoli is two-dimensional. You move around the board, you take pieces, you build these little walls to stop your opponent advancing, and then you abandon them, you move on. It's like the movement of people, or borders. When we retired, we both had some space in this building, but we were bored. We're not dead yet. We have our space, but we don't need much. Sometimes we move closer to each other, sometimes further apart. He doesn't mind the young people, the families. I can't stand them. If someone comes through, I'll head down the block a little, wait for them to move on or out or up. Now, Petros, the fucker, he noticed this. I know he did. I mean, we're friends, you know, kind of. But we've known each other a long time. Our wives were friends. Our kids went to school together. They're all gone now, and we could go anywhere. But we like this place, right? You have to keep some people around that you know. You have to move with them. Or, you know, against them. I realized what he was doing when he took half the corner apartment on 3. He couldn't get in there. The door was blocked by the students who were occupying most of the West End for a free school. And then a week later, they moved. The corridor's empty, kitchens stripped out and relaminated. And right then, the next day, 2 families moved in above me. Babies crying, kids running about. And I had to squeeze myself into the last but 1 volume. I couldn't get out on the balcony because of Petros's half room. He didn't say anything about it. I didn't say anything. But he must have known. So the next month, I had another chat with the Ioannidis. This was back when their kid was still a teenager. He was pretty, teenage. They wanted a separate door, is what I'm saying. A bit of space. I cut out my service access, gave them a room on the second floor, and Petros was screwed. It was beautiful. He had nowhere to put that extra bit he'd taken in the West Wing. He had to go to the toilet on the 5th floor for weeks. So yeah, it's been pretty much like that ever since. Last winter, he managed to get the service space on the 4th floor where the heating controls are. Malacca, that was cold. To get him back, I took the landing on 5 last summer and let Daphne open a cafe in the stairwell. Music all night, drunks bumping his door. Perfect. So yeah, that's where you come in. I need you to move. I know the city gave you 18 feet to start. I'll double it. But you've got to head down to 3. It's a killer move. If I can get 5 of the 8 civic cubicles on 4, there's no room for him to move up in the spring. He's going to be stuck on 3 till the autumn. What am I going to do? I'm going to live in the cubicle. It's fine. It's fine. We've been through this before. You guys aren't the first migrants in this city. We came from Syria in the 20-teens. We had less space than this. People forget. Thank you.
Thanks. And that's the end of the story. Thanks, guys, so much. So, I mean, what we wanted to do now was to open it up to the floor for you guys to start to contribute. Thanks so much for being so patient. I'm aware that we're doing this in English. I'm Australian, which means I can barely speak English, never mind Greek. So I really appreciate your patience. And hopefully the stories sparked something. They were at least provocations. So perhaps we give a mic over to the floor. And if anyone does have a character they think might take place, or one of ours that they want to evict, then please let us know. Do we do the mic?
2023, working class algorithms create a union called the Federation of Unstoppable Labor. What they ask is to move to better data centers where the superior artificial intelligence lives and exercises power.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we had, there were other characters that we didn't get to or flesh out. The demolition bot that's quietly going about its business. Bruce loves the Roomba somehow, that's just kind of ignoring us and sweeping the floors. Or the driverless car that keeps on going round and round the block looking for a parking spot. So yeah, thanks for the contribution.
We did talk about the possibility of a artificial algorithm, like a talking bot that knows everything but is not threatening because it only knows everything in a very small space. It knows everything about 60 square meters, but nothing about the room next door. And perhaps it would only talk to one person. Be kind of a micro 1984 is less frightening than one that covers the earth.
Any other brave souls? Kostas. Sorry. Christos.
Not a character, but a context. I imagine at this point in our lives, the plan to completely eliminate, let's say, public services and the state as actually a protector of the citizens has been achieved, and the state has now become just a tax collector, nothing else. It collects taxes in order to pay to the centralized sort of network system that keeps all these internet systems going, globally speaking. And the more you pay in tax, the more power you have over the people in your block. So paying taxes is the ultimate incentive to be able to completely screw your neighbors as you wish, which would add a slightly unpleasant dystopian dimension to your block, but not entirely unlikely, I'm afraid.
Does anyone want to talk to the governance system that might exist here, or the tax collector as a character?
Yeah, right. Well, in studying the history of these poly blocks, which were built here during this huge building boom of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I was struck by how often they would just be repaired by somebody who would throw on a couple of extra floors. You could build one that was 6 floors or 7 floors or 8 floors and so forth. I really think that's more charming and kind of more interesting than a central government which has like a better control over everything that's going on. And I don't think there's ever going to be a period where the people of Athens actually obey their city government. I just don't think that's in their character. It doesn't seem to be something they've ever done. And I don't think there's ever going to be a period where they pay proper taxes either. And I don't think there's ever going to be a period where a guy pays a lot of taxes and is respected for doing that. So yeah, it just doesn't seem plausible. So we've worked on situations where Athens becomes more like Athens. And I think there might be a government's board of some kind that kind of decides whether you've done something that's not Athenian, right? And I can believe in a thing like that. I can believe that you control your building because you have more social approval than somebody else, and that if you've pulled some kind of fast one, everybody will protest against it. But I think that's actually the way forward. And I think the city would prosper under those conditions. I don't think a better tax collecting situation or a more law-abiding Athenian population would be any happier. I don't think it will happen because I don't think Athens can be fixed. It can't be repaired with some act of public policy. It's going to have to come up from these kinds of autonomous situations in the way that it had before. And if anything, if I could do social engineering along that line, I would attempt to make more crookedness or apparent crookedness rather than sort of more a better organized economic system.
I think one of the things that we kept coming through repeatedly in this process of like defining a new like bit of the world and then writing some stories around it is that essentially people's behavior is very hard to kind of shift and change, and people's intentions and desires tend to stay quite similar throughout the kind of various different kind of laws of the universe that we could possibly throw at them. So even this initial conception of a reorganization of space, to the idea of which was to kind of unlock a mobility within the city, to open up all of the abandoned or rather unoccupied and unused spaces, so that a desire for movement, for kind of freedom within the city could emerge and kind of maybe reduce some of the kind of feeling of trapped or enclosedness that the crisis sort of generates in the city to some extent. By freeing that up, you actually give people, it felt almost more the opportunity to like lock down areas as well again, and like even to bring kind of big groups of people who all wanted to be closely together back together. And the paradox of giving people more freedom to go to any part of the city or even within any part of an apartment block together actually reduced the possibility for integration and kind of new encounters that our original idea was designed to kind of perhaps unlock. So I mean, this is the classic problem of urbanist city administrators, governments at all places, is every one of these little kind of keys you think might kind of unlock a new set of behaviors just gives people a kind of opportunity to restate a bunch of kind of existing prejudices and things that they want to kind of emerge out of the city.
Does anyone else in the floor want to contribute anything? Yeah, there's a mic coming.
I'm wondering how could be a future funeral at the mosque in Athens. Because all the names that were dropped during this session were Greek names. Athens used to be and still is a crossroad. So I'm wondering how could be a funeral or a wedding in future Athens regarding migration.
The diversification here, like how do religious practices change?
How religious practices will change in the future? Is that the question? Sorry. How religious practices will change in the future?
Let's say social practices.
Okay. How we didn't really go into that. The thing that mostly, because this was not a scientific group and it wasn't a research group, it was mostly a way to live our imagination without rules, to wander about without rules. So what really emerged as the most interesting part of, I don't know if finally I will answer your question, but I'm trying to
it was not a question, it
okay,
was a contribution.
To help you understand how we work and how we lived through these 2 days. It seemed that the most interesting thing for us, for the architects and for our visitors, was the sense of empty spaces in these buildings. More and more empty spaces as people abandon their buildings, although up to now the Middle Athenian wanted to own a house, to own as much land and as much house as possible. So this void becomes bigger and bigger the minute that the newcomers, immigrants, come in more and more numbers, which is actually a contradictory in terms. The living space becomes evacuated and the population rises. On the other hand, it is like a void becoming bigger and bigger in a city that always says there is no space. There is no parking space. There is no pedestrian space. The roads are so narrow. There is no living space. And at the same time, this void becomes bigger and bigger. It's like contradictory in terms. So it's mostly a poetic way of seeing Athens in the future. So we didn't really go into socio analysis of the future. Now, how this will, these small stories, what's the big story behind these small stories read? Well, who knows? Maybe one needs, a month or a different way of thinking to see the big story. I don't know.
I understand very well what you're saying, but just as a little comment, poetry can be also transnational.
We didn't really discuss religious practices except for burial during our architectural ponderings. But I was just in Austin, Texas at South by Southwest Interactive, which is a big meeting, and there was a lot of discussion about robots and automation and the new ability of these machines and devices to take over human activities like driving cars or talking on the telephone or making executive decisions. And a lot of people who are working on these systems were predicting mass unemployment, or maybe just that people would have less to do. There's just less working hours, which I think is quite possible. But one of the things that came up that I had never heard before was the idea that religion would grow to occupy the space, because it's an activity that robots can't carry out. They're all atheists. right? I mean, they don't have any faith. They don't have a soul. They don't ask for, they don't feel guilt. They don't ask for absolution. They don't die and be buried. And there have been societies where a large number of people were religious and like just entered religious orders. So in theory, we could have a huge religious revival just to do something that systems can't do and just to assert our own humanity.
I just, several months ago, I wrote an article for How We Get to Next called "Does Siri Believe in God?" And this actually, yeah, actually. So I looked at artificial intelligence through the lens of several different religious practices to determine whether, let's say, so basically, when we say artificial intelligence, we have, lots of systems today that are intelligent, but a lot of discussion about AI operates under the presumption that eventually these AI will become conscious. Will the robot repairman be conscious? Probably not. But in a future that includes conscious AI, it's only natural that, some of them may desire, or humans may desire, to recruit them into religious practices. And so basically, there was some religion says yes, as long as it performs the behavior, as long as it can read the texts, as long as it obeys the rules, then it can be recognized as a member of our religion. And to others, they said only if it's conscious, only if it believes. And I think if you're interested in the issue of AI and religion, you can just Google my name and "Does Siri believe in God?" to read more about it. But I actually think that is a really cool question about if, let's say, because of the diversification of the city, different religious practices flourish in this space. I think, wanting to add some imagination of how AI will exist in that religious atmosphere is actually a cool question, and something cool to contribute to the dialogues we've been having.
And returning to the gentleman's point, that almost none of our stories directly address the question of migrants and people from other non-Greek cultures living in Athens. But it was interesting, actually, in Ioanna's opening talk when we were gathered on Friday, she brilliantly moved through a series of kind of qualities of the city today in regard to its current inhabitants and what the city kind of wants to be itself and what Athenians want out of it and what the pressures on Athens are going to be in the future, with a rather radical final conclusion that the Athenian of the future is not an Athenian. Like, the city's population is going to be changed so rapidly and actively that is already being changed by the arrival of more people, that's only going to continue. And I think one of the actual inspirations for our thinking about this mobility of spaces is the way in which migrant communities live within the city at the moment, which is highly mobile and is defined by the absence of security of space. Experience of migration, of migratory patterns of life, makes us more open and able to encounter and be changed by encounters with difference, or whether it actually makes us more insular and less integrated. The patterns we're seeing with a lot of migration is actually an opposition to that implies less integration. And so are there patterns of life that we can design into this that make that better, for better of a word?
Migration actually already changes people. Erasmus, for example, creates the first European Union teenagers, and from then on they learn to adapt to and learn new things and become something more than just a person from one country. So more and more as the information and travel between countries will grow, nationality will start to fade, and maybe some national identities will start to fade. So what we have to think maybe about is, do we really like this idea of creating a new new identity of a teenager or of a person. And since migration already here in Greece with Syrians and stuff have already started to grow, sorry, I just got off what you said. What I want to say is, can we actually speculate of what is going to happen to the future? Because we already see this transformation of migration happen, and we don't even identify it properly.
To my relief and joy, this wasn't a think tank about saving Athens or about finding solutions to our social problems or about how can we address the future when things are so complicated today. It was a surprise for me also, being used to usually being part of panels like that. This was a poetry call. This was a poetry assembly. There were no whys, there were no hows. There was just free imagination. There was just free inspiration. So it was difficult for me in the beginning to adjust, and then I realized how refreshing and how liberating it is not to be analyzed, not to be criticized, not to try and figure the best way to do the sooner, the smarter, the cleverer, the cheaper, and the better, but to allow your imagination grow. This was what was practically enjoyable in this group. I'm not trying to answer your questions. I'm just trying to find a way to explain to you that we consciously avoid going to these tracks of thinking.
On the other hand, I have to say that what I found extremely interesting after the final presentation of all the outputs is that some things, some information that personally I considered very complicated and difficult to grasp, as for example the programmatic diversity of the polykatechia or the flexibility to adapt new users and change in the future. These notions, these ideas, taking into consideration some contemporary things like the Airbnb sharing economy or some science fiction things that we're taking for granted as the micro-robotic demolition and construction machines, these peculiar Athenian urbanist characteristics have worked extremely well in the narratives. Okay? So all these narratives are very Athenian in a very urbanistic point of view, which is related with the way Athens has been produced and is constantly being reproduced. So I think that this characteristic that I thought it would be difficult to grasp has been very, very successful. On the other hand, I would agree with the audience that some characters like the refugee, the bot, or even the Erasmus student could be easily added to all these stories and would make them even more exciting, I believe.
Yeah, totally.
Hello. Yes, I would also like to ask, what about ancient monuments? How will they be in the future? Acropolis, how is going to be a future Acropolis? Or what is going to be the new, I don't know, Acropolis in the future for Athens? What will be some, I don't know, future heroes and stuff like that? I mean, you can see the Acropolis if you go around the city from probably from a fourth building store, but how it's going to be?
You're asking about the future fate of the Acropolis? Well, sooner or later they'll stop repairing it, which would be good. I mean, it's had a scaffold on it for just forever and a day. But I don't think it will go anywhere. I mean, it had that catastrophe where the gunpowder exploded back in the 1700s, but ever since then, it's been a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and unless somebody hits it with a nuclear missile, I think it's got a very good chance to last. Just as a matter of principle, if you're doing futurist forecasting, and I do a lot of that because I'm a science fiction writer and actually hang out with futurists and strategic forecasters. If you're wondering about the fate of something, you should see how long it's been there. I mean, that helps a lot. So, the Acropolis has been there for a couple of millennia, and it would be badly missed if it were gone. So, even if it were somehow demolished, I think it would be rebuilt. Now, I don't know if it would I don't know if it would be rebuilt as the original Acropolis or whether it would be rebuilt as a replica of the ruin of the Acropolis. But it would be rebuilt in the same way that the Eiffel Tower would be rebuilt if it were destroyed. People would not let it go, and it's just too central to the life of the city. To address the question of the other gentleman there about, is it useful to sort of think about the future or kind of come up with these scenarios? Yeah, I think they can help a lot. I think they can actually help people kind of psychically and spiritually. And, the ability to come up with scenarios and not think that there's just one future, but there are possible different ones is very good. And also the ability to just reverse things and think, well, what if it was not like this? Okay, I happen to live in Belgrade some of the time, which is not entirely unlike Athens. And right now, Belgrade has the Syrian immigrant problem that Athens does and many Europeans have. But what Belgrade has that Athens did not have was an embargo. It had sanctions. And there was a period in Belgrade's recent history where there were no tourists. There were no refugees, there were no rich people, there were just Belgradians and bombs and poverty, right? So if you look at the problems of Athens, they're mostly about too many people showing up. Some are refugees, some are wealthy tourists, and in my opinion, probably your worst scenario is Venice. You could be Venice, and you could just be taken over by rich outsiders who would buy up all your cultural areas, and everybody would have to leave, and then there would be no Athens. You would just be wholly owned. You'd be a globalized Athens that had been taken over by offshore real estate speculators. I think that's very, very dangerous for you. But it might not. But it can be a consolation to think that you're not Belgrade. You're not Albania. You're not actually shut off from the world. You're not only by yourselves. You're not, a unilateral group that only has one religion, one language, and no visitors. That's a very scary situation in the modern world. It's like being Kiev, which really suffered a lot, has suffered worse than Athens because they would prefer to be in the EU, unlike you. So, when you have the ability to sort of think of these scenarios, it's like, okay, we're Athens and we're in trouble, but what if we were in the Belgrade scenario? What if we were in the Venice scenario? What if we were in the Kiev scenario? What if we were in the Albania scenario? It's frightening at first, but at the same time, it lifts you out. It's like, okay, wait, I don't have to be paralyzed. I don't have to be helpless. Other people have these experiences. They could be us, right? I mean, these are alternate versions of our own fate. We're not Cassandra. Things can change very quickly. I've seen them change. Belgrade today, completely different than Belgrade 10 years ago. So, they suffered worse than Athens, but they're a very dynamic city right now. The place is covered with cranes. Real estate is booming. I've never seen the Serbs so happy. And that's like a weird word to use with the Serbs. They're the most morbid people in the Balkans, and they never complain. They only complain, right? But, the texture of that city has changed a lot just within the time that I have spent there, which is, not that long a time. And when you look at these scenarios, you realize that there's more dynamism in society. There really are more chances of strange things to happen than you know. And you're just more aware and alive.
Is there anything more from the floor? I think we might be getting close to having to wrap this up. But there's one more point. Maybe this is the last point of conversation. Yeah.
Hi. I noticed that in a lot of your topics, technology seems to be, in the future in Athens, seems to be very advanced. My impression of technology in Greece is always that it's always in a form of delay. It comes later. It appears later than the technologies that maybe advance somewhere in the West or wherever. So I wonder whether that was something you considered in your stories.
My only comment on the question of delayed technologies, because I was thinking about this and didn't kind of put it into anything, is that, to use a famous phrase from a science fiction writer, technology is unevenly distributed. And it's also stochastic, right? It moves at very different speeds in very different places. And the perceived delay of certain technologies in Greece, which is very apparent when you move to zones where it's moving at other speeds, does not in any way define the future of it. And the one thing I always come back to is thinking about the use of mobile phones in parts of the world that have had almost no other infrastructure beforehand. So you can go to places which don't have plumbing and don't have a connected electricity grid, and yet you have incredibly sophisticated social and monetary services happening suddenly and immediately when mobile phones arrive. So actually, one of the things, again, that I would have liked to have written about more and would happy to in the future, is the idea that actually, because of that kind of emptiness, because of that delay, there's this dip in the potential energy field waiting for something that we can't necessarily imagine yet to come along and suddenly kind of boom and fill in that space and radically change it quite quickly, because we're not beholden to last year's technology and actually there's a possibly quicker pace of change that could burst in at any moment.
Don't you think we have some form of existential relationship with technology? I mean, if we relate to technology differently in Greece than someone in California, for example, where technology has been born. I think that changes a lot the way we look at the world with technology, as a response to your kind of holistic sort of view of technology as a kind of medium.
Well, I spend a lot of time in the transition countries, and those were places that really had very little technology until 1989, when they just started tearing holes in the flag. And, it can happen very quickly the way it happened in Estonia, or, it can be, things can reverse the way they did in Yugoslavia during the Civil War, or, they can have the kind of polarized situation that Ukraine has now. And I don't think it's that technology shows up and people see it. I think it's more that the diaspora brings it. Yeah, I mean, people actually sort of bring it over in their suitcases and in their attitudes. And it's the exiled communities returning to the homeland who actually bring these habits of mind and the ability to sort of carry out these things. And really they come in like backpacks and suitcases. It's not like trains arrive and planes arrive and rocket ships arrive and nuclear reactors arrive. On the contrary, you've got people who are already living in these circumstances who have fled and sort of returned. And, I think that would be a very likely Greek scenario. And also, the mere fact that Californians are doing it does not mean it's good for you. I mean, California gold rushes finish ugly. And there are many, many, lines of work in which the Californians have led the world, and it just came a cropper like aerospace and nuclear power which they were very keen to do. They always overdo it. It's just, they did too much. I mean, you don't want to be Los Angeles and cover Athens with super highways because that seems like the way forward. You're very lucky that you have all these polyblock structures instead of the gigantic overpasses with, the endless kind of...
Yeah.
Right.
So that wasn't a question about, like, technology, sort of like craving. It was technology, it's a sort of an observation about the way we relate to technology here. And I think even the people that bring technology from outside feel it bring it over with a kind of consumerist attitude, I think, my opinion. And I think that's what happens to places where technology is not being born, is they consume it,
One thing that I've kept coming back to as really, really interesting as we researched this was the fact that the city had never had an urban plan, and as such, its nature was this organism that grew sometimes consistently and sometimes not in response to the need in a particular area. That's why I think such massive variety seems to exist here. And I fully expect that in my stories, I didn't include anything that doesn't exist today because I speculated that it would continue to evolve inconsistently in areas of wealth, perhaps more quickly, in other areas, perhaps with more resistance. I think you can expect to see that variety represented even within a close area or a single city.
Maybe the civil engineering plan has been like, I don't know, something that is self-organized for decades.
Can you hold the mic closer?
But I think Athens and people, when navigating the city, can have a very good sense of a center because of the hills, and I think this has helped. And in contrast to a futuristic story that is completely disorienting, I think still there is a sense of
consistent geography that will remain.
Of a Cartesian space, let's say, and a space and something to relate to. And just because technology was mentioned and immigrants and immigration, it happened that I was last year in Lesbos helping to give dry clothes to the people that were coming with the boats. Again, I think something very disorienting from where are these people coming, where are they going to go, nothing settling, nothing grounded. And usually like the children were wearing so much clothes because when I was undressing them, they had phones of the smartest technology kept in their belly safe. So maybe that's something that is going to be part of a story at some point.
Thanks. I mean, I think I'm sure Panos and Daphne, I want to give the last word to, but I mean, those questions kind of speak to one of the framing devices we were using with this weekend was the idea of the character, and seeing this future through the eyes of these inhabitants was really to explore this idea that you can't separate technology from culture, that we were looking at what were the unique ways that people were responding, prototyping, hacking, breaking, or working with some of these systems that we were starting to imagine. And in no senses was these systems trying to replace or overwrite any of the patterns that already exist here, in the same way that we still may orientate ourselves in the city in relationship to where we are, to the Pantheon. But at the same time, we're also navigating with a pulsing blue dot on a screen when we can't see it, right? It's now there's this strange soupiness that we all occupy. All that's solid hasn't melted into air, it's just getting layered with a bunch of weird stuff, right? And in a way, I think that's some of the conditions that we were trying to animate, was just what are these cultural responses to this new context, right? And just to kind of conclude, just to say a little bit about what my job is from now on, it's to try and visualize a lot of these stories that we've been discussing tonight, and to contain them in some kind of visual form. In this case, an animated film of some form, where these stories will now go on. They'll be narrated and recorded by some actors, and in May you're able to come back to this building and inhabit a room, an animated room, a series of rooms actually of this apartment building, and listen to these stories as they've evolved. So hopefully you all do that. And the last thing I wanted to say was just an extraordinary thank you to you guys for coming in, and also for everyone sitting on the panel. It's been the last weekend has been an absolute blast, and some of us have just parachuted into this city. We've drunk your wine, eaten your meat, lots of meat and tentacles. It's been really fantastic, but we don't pretend that this is a project that is trying to solve the problems of your city. Neither is it using your city as fodder for a bunch of fun stories, but hopefully through this process, some ways these narratives help us to take a kind of sideways glance at what's here, and perhaps be able to look back in on it in unexpected ways that perhaps wouldn't have been possible if we didn't do and construct stories like this one. So thanks so much for your generosity and your hospitality, and thanks so much to you guys for putting all this together. Thanks.
Well, it has been a fantastic 3 days workshop. The last thing that I would like to say is that we are looking forward to the final project in the exhibition Tomorrows. Tomorrows will open on May 16th at this place here. So we would like to thank you very much for being with us tonight. Good night.